Hey, welcome to Super Social Club. I'm Jeremy.
This is Whisky In the 6, I'm Rob.
Welcome to the Whisky Rant podcast.
It's a little crusty.
It's frustrating.
And it's going to be a little bit of a rant.
I don't understand it. I don't know why.
Some sort of injustice.
Anyway, end rant.
Hello and welcome to the Whisky Rant podcast. We finally made it happen. It took some time. COVID got in the way, but we're finally able to get together, do this podcast we've been talking about for a while. If you're tuning in for the very first time, I'm Jeremy. This is Rob. We both have whiskey review channels on YouTube. Rob, how long have you been doing that for?
I'm going on 5 years. My channel is called Whisky In the 6, for those of you that don't know. Whiskey of all sorts and spirits of all sorts.
Yeah, you were one of the, I guess like original whiskey tubers back when kind of that started blowing up. I was doing written reviews for Toronto Whiskey Society starting in 2016. My channel is on YouTube now, is about almost 2 years old. I'm doing that. Welcome to the Whisky Rant podcast. What to expect on this? Kind of like, I guess, a more kind of segmented, planned out live show that we normally do on YouTube.
Yeah.
What we're going to do in every single episode is review a well-value, more accessible kind of whiskey. Today's one, we're doing the Old Forester 1920 Prohibition Style Kentucky Straight Bourbon.
Yeah, $75 at the LCBO. Came recently. A lot of people have been waiting a long time for this to come to the LCBO. It's been selling out it sold out like crazy, but in the U.S. it's readily available.
Readily available in the U.S. You're looking like around $60 US, when it's like $75 here. So almost the same with the conversion rate. Great value whiskey in our opinion. You're getting, 57.5% ABV.
That's right. Yeah. Quality bourbon overall. I mean, this is your first experience with it.
It is my first experience with this, yeah.
I've had it for a while now. I did plan on reviewing it for the channel, but I thought it would fit in well for the podcast. And these will be appearing on our channels as well.
Sure, right? Yeah. We'll do maybe like a more detailed review. But we'll be sipping this throughout the podcast, throwing out notes here and there, and then we'll give it a score at the very end. Also on today's show, we're going to do our rant topic on regional restrictions, limitations, pricing, in different markets of the world. Us here in Ontario, we have to adhere to the LCBO. You'll hear us say that a lot. It's the Liquor Control Board of Ontario.
That's right.
They are government run, the only stores that can legally sell spirits. So we are at the mercy of their monopoly. Happens elsewhere in the United States. Some states with the ABC liquor stores, government run, they're at the mercy of what they bring in and what they charge for pricing.
Yeah, just to preference that that LCBO that you're going to be hearing a lot, it used to be the second largest buyer in the entire world for alcohol.
Right.
Now I believe it's dropped down to third, but it's behind Costco and I think Total Wine, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
So it's pretty big. It's purchasing globally third most in the world.
They have huge buying power.
That's right.
And they can do what they want.
Pretty much, yeah.
Also coming up in today's show, we'll do a little segment on interesting finds for the secondary market. So if we see an interesting bottle that's out there, maybe we'll bring that to you, discuss in further detail. Another segment we got on the podcast today, what's happening on WhiskeyTube, commenting on, our fellow peers in the whiskey YouTube review community, kind of going into that in some detail. And then at the very end, we'll give this bad boy a score.
Yeah.
So let's just talk about the whiskey real quick. What do you get on this?
Your standard bourbon with a lower rye, I guess you can say.
Yeah, the first time I put my nose to this, I did smell like a lot of rye spice. And then I looked up the mash bill. We're looking at
72% corn,
18% rye, and 10% malted barley. So the 18% rye, I guess, is kind of average, I'd say. Maybe just a tick above average. Usually 12 to 15% rye, usually in a bourbon.
I think you're right, actually.
It's a non-weeder, yeah.
Yeah, usually the corn gets well into the 60s. So yeah, it's probably a little higher than usual for rye, but I get a lot of that like common brown sugar note.
Yeah, that like rich brown sugar,
Yeah.
the caramel, vanilla, cherry, all those like typical bourbon notes. Really well balanced in here, and then that spice kick. I get a lot of spice on the finish.
Yeah, I'm starting to find that cherry note in non-bourbon whiskeys as well, and I feel like it has a lot to do with the char level of the barrel.
Sure, you get in like an ex-bourbon barrel with a lot of char. You
Yeah.
might be picking up a little bit of that cherry coming.
Yeah, like the Cavalon Virgin Oak, for example, was a
Sure.
great example of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is great stuff.
Yeah, I really like it.
Yeah, you can tell why this thing sold out quick in Ontario.
Yeah, I mean, we're deprived in Ontario, so that's a big part of why. People see something like this, although there are great gems out there that...
There are a few special occasions, and let's
Yeah.
just get into our rant. And so it is going to be about regional limitations, buying whiskey, availability, price, depending on where you live. Definitely some regions have it amazing. You look at Canada with Alberta, they don't have a liquor control board. They pay a small amount of tax on
Yep.
all their imports.
There, even as a civilian of Alberta, you don't have to own your own liquor store to be able to outsource alcohol, which is huge. Like, you can buy from distilleries. I recently stumbled upon someone that bought 16 bottles of Lejeune 21-year-old directly from the distillery. So, I mean, I'm not gonna be mentioning names or anything of that sort, but 16 bottles that they imported themselves.
Yeah.
Like that's unheard of in Ontario. We would never ever be able to do that. That's a immediate seize, and you might actually get like slapped with a fine or something at that point. Who knows?
One hilarious thing about the LCBO, and if I can find it, I'll put it up. If you do want to order some product that they don't have, they straight up tell you on their website that it will cost 10 times the price
Yeah.
of what it would
Absolutely.
be normally priced at, because they got to bring it in and they got to put their duty on. And normally you're looking at minimum one case to order.
Yeah, and so a friend of ours and I worked out the pricing, and it works out to essentially double the bottle every single time. And so you're buying something because you're getting a value across the pond, and then by the time it gets to you, it costs more than what it would probably cost at the LCBO if they had it.
It's crazy. And I mean, availability too. Like, we're at the mercy of what they bring in. And yes, they do bring in some good stuff sometimes.
Yeah,
but
there are
you
a
think
few
that
things.
one of the top three biggest buying powers of spirits in the world would have everything that you've ever wanted.
I think the real issue here is that the LCBO doesn't employ whiskey experts. They have wine experts, or at least people that they train in the wine category, but they don't actually have a spirit expert. And I don't mean a buying expert. I mean someone that knows details about all the different types of spirits. And you probably need someone for every category because they're so vast. Sure. So you need a whiskey category expert. You need a rum guy. You need your cognac guy, or Armagnac, or brandy, let's call him, right? So the LCBO doesn't have any of that, and they're not investing any money into that because that's at the moment not their breadwinner. And I think it could be. Like, you're seeing globally whiskey shops or alcohol shops in general thriving on selling whiskey, especially if you bring in the right kind of thing. So
yeah, LCBO seems like very wine centered. I'm pretty sure to get up in different levels of the LCBO, even at like the retail level, you go through like essentially wine tasting. You familiar yourself with, what a sommelier would do, more or less.
yeah.
So yeah, very wine centered. I feel like the LCBO even kind of incorporates a bit of the Costco model, where they want to keep their product numbers kind of limited, right? Because like our good friend Cam, he was saying, as soon the Macallan Edition 5 is going to come out as soon as they've sold off all the Macallan Edition 4s, right? Because they need the shelf space.
Yeah.
They want to like roll out that product and then put the new product in.
Yeah, the Macallan Classic Cut 2019, I think, just hit shelves recently, like the last few weeks. And that's only because, like you just said, the 18 was still like lingering for a little while. So they didn't want to bring in a new product and then have multiple years on the shelf. But I don't think that's a problem. I think that's something that's good. You're gonna get the whole dusty bottle collector type crowd in.
Yeah, I mean, get your Glenfiddich 12 and just keep out a couple and just restock it when you need to, and
Exactly.
make room for other stuff. Don't hold stuff in your warehouse for months and months and months. You know, LCBO is notorious for having just stuff coming out way, way later than the rest of the world.
Yeah, they're finding product in their warehouse that was supposed to be released about 6-7 years ago, and sometimes that actually benefits us, because then you'll get what happened with the Kalila 18 not too many years ago, where the Kalila 18 cast strength unpeated came out and it was $100 Canadian,
Right, yes.
and everywhere else in the world is closer to $200 Canadian.
Yeah, they found an old price sheet from like 2001 and like, oh yeah, that's probably fine.
Well, I think the issue with that one was that they had purchased that product so long ago that they had nothing to base it on. So they have nobody with their finger on the pulse. That's the main issue, right? The high-end bottles, they notify their high-end buyers. I'm sure restaurants are getting kickbacks, or not kickbacks, but first dibs on stuff. And I'm sure high-end bars are getting first dibs on things as well, which is probably what every alcohol store in the world does.
It's true, but I mean, when you have something government run, you kind of want, you know, it to be fair, because like you're a taxpayer just like they are, and you should have just as much chance of them getting it. I mean, and that's another thing we can rant about is how much allocated bourbon they bring in. Like if you look at our population for our area and how many like BTAC bottles they get, how many Pappies they get, it's absurd, right? Because where we get, how many 23-year-old Pappies does Ontario get per year? 6?
Yeah, if that. I don't even know.
It might not even be that much.
And I think those are going straight to restaurants. I really don't even think that they're part of the lottery. I think they just put it, quote unquote, in the lottery for like to appease.
Well, the information used to be out there. You should be able to see exactly what the LCBO was getting as far as bottles are concerned. I don't think last year they released those numbers. I think that they've kept those under wraps, because I think Buffalo Trace kept their numbers under wraps as well.
I think so. You would think Buffalo Trace would provide the LCBO with a lot more, considering how much of the standard Buffalo Trace they probably sell and all that other stuff.
If the LCBO was in a U.S. state, I'm sure it would, but because it's in Canada, they're like, we're keeping our product mostly in the United States, which is understandable.
Understandable, yeah.
I
but
guess.
Then we get Crown Royal that sends our product,
That's true. Right?
our good product, to the south. That's another story. But, I mean, we shouldn't just focus on the LCBO tonight, because there are other places that are suffering these situations as well.
Of course,
There's parts of the U.S. that are completely dry, right? People have to go out of town or county to get alcohol. There's parts of the U.S., I'm not sure, up until recently, I believe the Scotch 4 dummies were in a situation where on Sundays they couldn't buy alcohol from where they live, right? So that's, to me, that's kind of interesting. I think if a country has an alcohol law in one city, state, or province, it should be that for the entire country. I mean,
well, you know, Prohibition really fucked everyone around, because all those laws were in place right after Prohibition, and governments were like, we're going to be selling the liquor to you, we're going to be taking our cut, and you can deal with it.
But what's absurd, what's the most, I guess, ironic and absurd is that during Prohibition, we were the liberal ones. We were the ones that were running our whiskey to the south, because they were the ones that were, it was illegal. It was illegal in the U.S. to have alcohol, or in most states anyway.
Well, and Canada went through a Prohibition period for themselves as well. We went through a little bit of Prohibition too.
Yeah, see, in general, I just feel like our laws have become way more conservative when it comes to alcohol, especially in Ontario, than what's happened in the U.S. Obviously, there's the exception to the rule. Like we said, there's the dry counties or dry days where like you can't buy at all. But
yeah, it's gotta be frustrating, because like you watch Whiskey Tube, guys are getting all these bottles, and you'll never ever see one in your state and your province on the shelf, because they're not bringing it in. And if you want to, you can't order alcohol in from other states. It's prevented. There's lots of states you can't ship to. You look at around the world, there's lots of states that UK sites won't ship to because of the laws there. It's frustrating, and really, like, you would hope an open, free market capitalism, you should be able to pay your tax and bring your bottle in. Right?
Well, you would think that anybody should be able to call up a store in the UK or a store or a distillery, store in Europe, whatever, and say, okay, I want X amount of this or whatever. It gets to customs. Customs calls you up to say, okay, you owe this amount in tax to clear your bottles. And that is based on what the tax is in that province, which in our province is 13%. Sure. So that's what it should be. I believe in Alberta, that's exactly how it works. And I know that it's not the 5%. I think it works out to something different, but it's very, very minuscule when it comes to the tax that they have to pay to import alcohol. And I think that's what it should be. Like, everybody's happy. The province still gets their money, and the person that's the avid whiskey collector / drinker gets their whiskey, gets what they're actually looking for, because the LCBO is not providing it. So we should be able to find alternative routes.
Well, let's move on to our next topic, the secondary market, because it relates to this. And we'll talk about an auction house in Ontario that is linked with the LCBO. All right, so here in Ontario, we have one auction house that is sanctioned by the LCBO. They're the only ones that have authority under the Liquor Control Board of Ontario to sell spirits in the secondary market. And it's not cheap.
No,
they
it's not.
Charge a very huge premium.
Looking at some prices here actually right now.
Yeah, we'll tell you. We'll throw some up on the screen and tell you guys about what these prices go for on the secondary market here. Now, if you want to legally buy secondary market alcohol in Ontario, you have to go through Waddington's. They are the only ones sanctioned by the LCBO. 20% additional buyer's fee on hammer price. So they're additional 20% commission, which is double what you'd see in the UK auction. I'm not sure about other places, but you can guarantee the LCBO is taking probably half of that.
Oh, for sure. Oh, for sure. It's got to be worth it for both parties, right? The LCBO and Waddington's.
So here's what could happen. You buy a bottle of alcohol from the LCBO. They charge you their ridiculous amount of tax. Then you sell it through Waddington's, and the LCBO takes another crazy additional pound.
So
on
probably
top of
getting
that.
10 and 10.
Oh my goodness, man!
It's hilarious because some of these things, I mean, it's absurd what they go for.
Yeah, so let's I did a couple screenshots here. So everyone's favorite, Pappy Van Winkle, 23-year-old. Selling price, 5,100 Canadian dollars. So that's including the buyer's premium, which is the extra 20%. So you're looking at a bottle that goes for approximately 2,200, 2,300, let's say, US dollars in the secondary market.
Right.
With the exchange rate, what are we looking at? Like 30, 35?
Yeah, ish. I mean, so I'm trying to think of who would actually buy something like this. And we kind of touched on it before we started recording about like restaurants purchasing this stuff. Because really the only way, like we mentioned earlier, the only way a restaurant can purchase this stuff is if they purchase it through Waddington's. They can't put anything on their shelf that isn't from either the LCBO or Waddington's.
Right. So in Ontario, if you want to sell alcohol in your restaurant, in your establishment, it has to be purchased through the Liquor Control Board of Ontario.
Yeah.
Or Waddington's auction.
So hypothetically, the Caledonian purchases that $5,000 bottle of Pappy Van Winkle 23, because I don't see too many collectors paying full pop secondary. Like, that's beyond full pop secondary. That's double.
If you're a collector in Ontario and you want to buy it legitly, I guess this is the only way you can do it. I mean,
I guess so.
Maybe there's a lot of wealthy people that are sticklers for the law.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's possible. And I guess you would get a receipt and all those other things. Maybe it's something you could write off if you're a businessman, all these other loopholes and whatever else. But I just did a quick calculation here. If you were a restaurant or high-end bar that purchased that Pappy Van Winkle 23-year-old, you would, just to like eat the cost of the bottle per ounce, and you gotta like assume that there's gonna be some loss. So you have to sell just to break even $200 a dram, $200 an ounce, just to break even. Which they're not gonna do. They're gonna sell it for probably $400 or $500 a dram, I guess. But like, who's walking into a bar and paying that kind of money?
And I can tell you for a fact that I purchased a dram of Happy 23 from Drake's Hotel bar, which is a really nice bar here in Toronto, and it was $75 a pour. Now that was 3-ish years ago.
That's a very reasonable price.
Maybe 4 years ago. That's a great price.
Yeah,
that is a great price.
Yeah, so assuming the Drake Hotel got it for LCBO retail, which is what, $450, which is actually not bad for a Pappy Van Winkle 23.
Right.
Or at the time, it was about $450.
Yeah.
So they made their money. They walked away pretty happy. But this guy over here that just paid $5,000 for that bottle,
yikes! Right?
He needs to sell per dram to make $1. You know.
Now, to their credit, we don't know if that's maybe like a really old 23, like back when they're doing distillate from Stitzel Weller, right? Yeah, we're not sure if that was a Stitzel Weller or not, which those do command more, but still.
Yeah.
Here's another one, Macallan 18-year-old. So the old label, the old 1995 distillate, 960 Canadian dollars. So that's a bottle that usually goes on the secondary market in the States around 500 or so. 500 to 600. Now look at this, a brand new Macallan 18, the new ones, the new releases, $840. Now how do you make sense of that? Because this bottle you can go out and buy in the States for, let's say, $275-ish, $300, depending on where you are. I've seen them for as low as $260. So how is someone buying a brand new bottle of Macallan 18 at an auction for $8? Like, we're in the wrong business here.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm looking at the price of a Macallan 17-year-old Fine Oak that we were able to purchase at the LCBO for probably one of the better prices globally, actually, at around like $200 Canadian. Not that long ago. Maybe a year ago, maybe a year and a half. $780 Canadian. Now, I know that I could purchase this bottle in other places for retail less than $300. So you made over double on that Macallan 17-year-old.
A bottle that you can easily just get on the shelf, not limited whatsoever. I mean, hundreds of thousands of bottles available of it. It's insane. Anyway, so kind of fits in with our regional rant, in secondary market. Now, there's one other bottle that really struck my eye in that auction, and it was a 1969 Signatory Vintage Springbank. Now, this is the number 6 bottle on Whiskey Base. Number 6 of the top 1,000. It was estimated to sell for $9,000 to $12,000. I don't think it's sold because I was looking it up. Unless it's still up, there was no final price on it. So maybe there was a reserve, it didn't get met. But yeah, what a great bottle that would have been, to go in on.
Yeah. I don't know if I could stomach that price though. But eventually I think we're gonna probably venture into something in that price range just because we're crazy enough to do it, and if we're at this for long enough, it's gonna happen.
We'll get 10 guys or 20 guys to go in on it, and we'll all buy an ounce of whiskey for $1,000.
Yeah, pretty much.
Let's move into the final discussion of the night. What's happening on WhiskeyTube? So this one we kind of want to just talk about, our peers on WhiskeyTube. Tonight's topic is going to be what I like to call the Ralfy Effect.
Yeah.
Now, if you're unaware, Ralfy, the OG of YouTube whiskey reviewers, started 10 years ago, paved the way for us and all the other 100 reviewers that are now out on YouTube reviewing whiskey. His knowledge, his understanding, far superior to anyone in the entire game.
Yep.
You can learn more from his channel than you can anywhere else. Forget about going to those 2-day whiskey training events where you come out with a certificate. Spend your money and your time on Ralfy.com.
Yeah.
He is the best. So he moves the needle with his reviews. He'll make a whiskey sell out, and his influence also really, really influential. So he's really big. I think it was a couple years ago. He stopped reviewing any whiskey that didn't have an age statement on it. So he would not be reviewing this bottle right here.
He wouldn't be reviewing
because they don't tell you
this.
the age.
Right.
Yeah. Another big thing he was against is chill filtration.
Chill filtration, added color.
Now, he'll review a whiskey that's been chill filtered, but
right.
he will definitely mention to you that it's not the way it should be done.
Yeah.
So now you get a whole generation of whiskey buyers who are influenced by this, and they are not buying whiskey that doesn't have an age statement, not buying whiskey that's not chill filtered. Now, I see good and bad about that. I'm sure your comments on YouTube, you've seen people will be like, oh yeah, it's okay, but like, there's no age statement on it. So even though you gave it a great review, you think it's a great whiskey, I'm not buying that because there's no number on the front.
Exactly. Now, I mean, we've talked about this on our YouTube channels where you're missing out on a lot of great whiskey if you decide not to ever drink a no age statement whiskey. Like there's just a ton out there that are well worth it. I recently just did a best no age statement video, top 6 or whatever it was. No age statement whiskey is a whole category that you need to build on. Like it's one of the foundations, the building blocks of your whiskey journey. If you're gonna become well in the know and like develop your palate to where it should be, you need to go through all the, like not all of them, but like a good portion of no age statement whiskeys to know that there's no age statement whiskeys that are much better than 18-year-old, 20-year-old whiskeys out there. Right? So the only way you're going to know that is if you try them.
Yeah, I mean, there's good and bad things about age statements, I would say. Definitely you can be fooled by an age statement. Something that has a big number on the front, commands a big price, doesn't necessarily mean that the quality is going to be there or your enjoyment is going to be that much better. And then the downside of no age statements, you could get a distillery establishing a brand really, really well with a non-age statement, and then in subsequent releases throwing younger whiskey in there, and you'd absolutely never know it. You can look at batch variations with something like an Ardbeg Ugadel.
Right, great point.
Those batches, in my experience anyway, have differed a little bit. You don't know, like, are they putting younger stuff in there from year to year? And then they can hide it, right? They can hide it.
I mean, a lot of people fear that that's the reason why they use the no age statement, so that if next year we don't have a great 12-year-old batch, or we don't want to use all our 12-year-old batch, we're going to use a 5 or 6-year-old batch, and that's still legal.
I mean, I find it hard to fault distilleries for doing that. I mean, they're at the mercy of what they can produce. I get it from a marketing standpoint. I get it from a business standpoint.
Yeah.
And that's why there's reviews out there. That's why the people will review stuff. And that's one of my knocks, I think, on Ralfy, how much I love his channel. I'm a Patreon supporter of Ralfy. I love Ralfy. But to not review something, I would rather him review it and tell me why I should not buy it than for him to just bypass it completely and then have to find out for myself or, of course, from other reviewers.
Yeah. Ralphy's, his influence is huge on this market, and we saw that with a prime example is the Glenallachie 12-year-old, a bottle that's regularly released, a bottle that you can get pretty much anywhere, which was selling in Ontario for secondary prices at one point because of the Ralfy Whiskey of the Year. It was a Whiskey of the Year, I guess, 2 years ago or whatever it was. So his influence is huge, and when he boycotts something, there's going to be a ton of people following suit.
Yeah.
And you know what? I think what he did put distilleries in check and said, hey, listen, if you're going to put out a no age statement, you better make sure it's good because you already don't have my support, and there's going to be a lot of people out there that follow suit unless you put out a good product.
Yeah, I mean, like, for the record, you and I are both for age statements. We're for 100% transparency.
Absolutely.
Tell me how old it is. Tell me what cask you use.
Absolutely.
Tell me the proportions.
Yeah, we've talked. I'd rather see 3 years old on a bottle than no age statement. But that doesn't mean that the no age statement whiskey is going to be bad. Right?
Yeah.
So I think it's hard to stomach buying a no age statement whiskey without knowing enough about it, without someone trying it, without a review being out on it when you're spending X amount of dollars above what you like. I guess Balvenie Tun's a great example of that.
Balvenie
right?
Tun is a great example of one of the best NASs that I've ever tried.
Right. You know that there's older whiskey because they disclose it later, but they don't have to disclose all of what's in that bottle because it's, in essence, a noise statement whiskey, right?
And a great thing that blenders can do is they can give you that old whiskey and then liven it up with some younger stuff too.
Right,
Like
exactly.
Get that vibrancy up, and it makes a great mix.
Absolutely.
Old whiskey combined with some younger stuff too, you can get great results. And I get why they don't want to put an age statement on there, because they'd have to do the youngest age statement, and it doesn't really represent like the 40-year-old whiskey that's in some of those tons when you're going to put like a 20-year-old age statement on it. And you're like, well, why is this 20-year-old Balvenie more money than their 21-year-old?
Right.
It's lesser of an age, but it's more. Well, you don't know there's actually some super old whiskey in there.
Exactly. So, yeah, I mean,
And that's the Scotch Malt Whiskey Society, or whatever it's called, the ones that rule the limitations on that, right?
Yeah.
They should broaden their scope a bit and allow
Absolutely.
distilleries to put, this is how much 20-year-olds in it, this is how much 10-year-olds in
yeah,
it.
it doesn't make sense that they don't allow that. I mean, Compass Box got into a lot of trouble for doing something similar to that, and there was a big debate, and I think there's lawsuits involved, and a whole bunch of different things, and it's because of that. It's because put it this way, and I kind of sympathize with distilleries for this reason. If I have a bottle that's predominantly 18-year-old whiskey, and I want to sell this bottle because it, the market value for roughly 18, 17-year-old whatever whiskey is, let's say, $200. Now, I put this really special 5-year-old whiskey in this bottle, but it's like 5% or 3% of the portion of that bottle, but it makes the whiskey better. There's no doubt in your mind that it makes the whiskey better. Should that bottle no longer be worth $200 because it's no longer technically 18 years old, it's now 3 years old,
Yeah.
right? Because you have to go by the youngest whiskey in the bottle,
Yeah.
right? Or should it be actually worth now $250 because it's way better than it was just at 18 years old?
Sure. I mean, and Compass Box famously did their 3-year-old deluxe, right? Where they had, it's 20-plus-year-old whiskey in it.
That's right.
1% is 3-year-old whiskey, and they had to put 3-year-olds on it. You see, it kind of is like a knock to the Scotch Whiskey Association.
Exactly. That was, I think, just after they basically took a beating from them, like, for all sorts of different things that they were doing. Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's a mistake if you're going to completely ignore the noise statement category. I can understand why Ralphie does it, but I'm not going to do that because I know that I'd be missing out on a lot of whiskeys that I actually really love. Like,
for sure.
There's a whole bunch.
Yep.
So,
all right, well, I think that we're going to end it there. Let's finish it off with a score on this Prohibition style. What are you giving this thing?
I mean, it's great value. And I don't, on my YouTube channel, I don't normally give things marks for values, but I guess here I can because it's not my YouTube channel.
There you go.
So because this is such great value, I think I'd give this at least an 86, 87. Mm-hmm. I think it's quality stuff. It checks all the boxes. If you're a bourbon drinker, you're probably looking at my score and saying, you're an idiot. This is like a 91 or whatever. I like all sorts of whiskeys. I mainly like Scotch, or single malt anyway. But I would say that's, I think a fair score is an 86.
I'm going to be the Mike to your Narby, and I'm going to go 86 and bump it up 1 point for value and make it 87. I think the complexity, the finish is great. It's nice and drawn out. Great balance to it. You're getting a lot of whiskey, for especially with the 115 proof.
Absolutely.
Definitely brings the power. I think it's great for anyone who is really into bourbon, especially higher proof bourbons.
Absolutely.
Really good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome, man.
All right, well, that concludes our first episode. This podcast is probably going to evolve and, kind of change as we go along, figure out where we want to go with it. But, I'm happy with this first episode. And look forward to more stuff. We're going to post this on both our YouTube channels. If you're listening to it on a podcast, it will be available whatever streaming service you use.
Yeah.
And until next time, guys, we'll see you then.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.